All right, we are on air. It is Thursday, August 17th. Thank you guys for coming. This meeting is a check-in on active development tasks for Backdrop CMS. Quick update from the PMC. We are still working on signing and returning our contracts to get our fiscal agreement in place with the Conservancy. We should have an update on that as soon as they get all of our contracts from us. BackdropCMS.org has also been updated to the latest secure version of Backdrop, which was released yesterday. Nate, I don't know if you want to talk about 1.7.2, or maybe Jeff, you did the release. No, you're muted.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. Okay, so 1.7.2 came out yesterday. We coordinated the release with Drupal. That there wasn't a Drupal 7 release yesterday, but there was a Views release yesterday for Drupal 7. And so the security fix that we included corresponded to the new release of Views. And we also fixed an issue that was exclusive to Backdrop that was introduced in 1.7. So it's great to knock out a couple of those security fixes. 1.7.2 also has a bucket of other just small bug fixes here and there. And so, yeah, it was great to get that out. And big thank you to Jen and Jeff for pretty much running that entire release from the merging to the tagging to the releasing to the release notesing to the security announcementing. So that was awesome. I don't think that have we pushed that change out to the Pantheon upstream and Docker images yet? Yeah, so we've got a couple of follow-up issues there that we'll be working through either today or tomorrow to kind of make sure that all of our upstream sources of Backdrop are all up to date as well. Yeah, and if you run a Backdrop website, we recommend you update as soon as possible. We also had, this is the first security announcement, and we got to use the fancy pants new security announcement functionality on backdropcms.org. And so if you have a user account on backdropcms.org, you can sign up for security mailing list in your profile. And that automatically went out yesterday. So that was awesome to see that go off and fire and have all of that stuff automated. So very cool. Okay, so that's it for 1.7.2, which means all of the items that are slated for the next bug fix release that aren't in 1.7.2 are now candidates for being completed in 1.7.3, the next bug fix release. And we'll see how this goes, with the release of 1.8 coming up in less than a month. 1.7.3 may be the last bug fix release for 1.7. And if we don't have another bug fix release before September 15th, then 1.7.3 will come out the same time as 1.8 does. It's kind of the last maintenance release of the 1.7 branch. So we've got a bunch of minor little issues. We've been going through and kind of picking these up, picking up some long-standing issues. Issue 1200 fixed the way that captions are handled. That is just getting a little re-roll, and then we think that that will likely be complete. A whole bucket of cross ports from Drupal. We've got issue 2013 that is for Drupal 7.50 and previous versions, and that one's more than halfway done. And I know there's probably some new PRs there that are probably ready for review as well. And then we have 3 more cross-porting issues that are issue 27, 74, 75, and 76. And I won't go through all of those individual ones, but it would be nice, as always, to kind of keep up with the minor fixes that are happening on the Drupal side as well, even if they're just things like expanding test coverage and fixing code style and documentation. That's a lot of what these fixes usually are. But there's some real gems in there as well. Let's see. So you can pick out the issue tracker on backdropcms.org for issues that are slated for 1.73 by using the 1.73 milestone in GitHub. Okay. Next up is 1.8. 1.8 is the next minor version of Backdrop that will be coming out September 15th, 2017. We have a couple of changes that have been introduced in 1.8, mostly minor little additions here and there. And we have got a couple of larger items that we are still working through that we'd love to include in 1.8. The first item that we've got in that list is layout relationships, which is issue 2134. No new activity on this since last week. So I don't know, I've been giving some thought to the way that we handle that particular issue. I'm torn between like going with what we have here, which is something that Doc Wilmot put together last release and looks really pretty good, versus some new thoughts that I've been having regarding this. So anyway, that one's probably on me to get some reviews and thoughts in there. Although more feedback from other people is always appreciated.
Have you written down these thoughts yet?
No, I haven't, and that's why I was like, I think I'll probably hold off on just verbalizing them and instead write them all down.
Okay.
Because, well, yeah.
Or maybe let's verbalize it at the end of the meeting.
Yeah, you want it? Well, we could do both if you wanted to. Yeah, let's do it at the end of the meeting. Let's put that in the general discussion.
Okay. Adding now.
Okay. Oh, you want to do that after broadcast?
Oh, well, sure, we can do it during. That's fine.
Yeah, let's do it during. That could be fun. Okay, let's continue on 1.8 though. So 1.8, we're also working on improving the media handling in general and specifically around files and images. And there's a meta for that at 1448. Issues within that category include making files into proper fieldable entities. They already are entities, but making them fieldable is issue 2632. And that one is in a needs review status. It hasn't seen any updates recently, but the code is there and functional, and that mostly needs review from other contributors. Editing an existing managed file is 2796. This is a new one that has come up just this past week that kind of separates off the task of creating new files from the managed file interface to just separating the create from the edit. And the edit is a lot easier for now. So if we want to iterate and just get edit completed, that one is a really good candidate to knock out right away. That's issue 2796. So that one we could probably complete immediately and then work on adding a file, which is issue 2633. And that issue needs some additional work yet. We also have another issue worth calling out, issue 1380, that is adding support for multiple file upload. And the most recent suggestion in here is that we port the approach from a module from Drupal 7 called file resup, which is resume upload, I think is what they're trying to abbreviate there, which is a neat module that not only allows multiple file upload, but also allows stopping and resuming uploads. And that requires a lot fewer changes. It's just JavaScript additions to the existing file widget. So that could be a way for us to achieve multiple file upload without doing a huge amount of refactoring. I looked at the underlying approach, and it looks pretty good, but it's a little bit concerning because it like requires like a database table to track in progress uploads. So I'm not totally sure about the repercussions of implementing that approach.
Yeah, this seems like a big thing, and we're fairly late in the game here. So can we just shelve this part of the file stuff until the next release?
It's a kind of our lower priority
Yeah.
one, so it's probably the first one to get bumped.
Yeah, I would say we bump it because it seems like there's some fundamental differences in the different ways we can handle it. So we might want to have a larger discussion on this sort of how we want to handle this stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there anything in Contrib that does this right now?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. You could just take this file recept module and port it to Backdrop, and that would.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Any of the other modules that are mentioned in that issue, like there's a ton of solutions in Contrib for Drupal. Yeah. So it's not like people are having problems. It would be nice to solve it. So I think it's totally fine to bump this or release.
Yeah, and I'd say if we get into Contrib first, so we can test it out, that would be better.
It's a really fun little known feature that we included probably I think in 1.4 or 1.5. Did you know that if you're on a mobile device and you upload a file from Backdrop, you can use the camera on your phone to upload a file? Pretty cool.
That actually is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's really neat. That was it was a gem discovered by Klonos. It was actually really trivial and awesome to implement. Okay, let's see. Let's carry on. There's a couple of new items in here that it looks like Jen may have added. Date module pager, which is issue 2766. Could you recap that one for us, Jen?
Sure. So it was just a part of date module that was accidentally not included when we moved to date module into core. And so somebody noticed that this feature was missing and created an issue, and then they read all of the date module port issue and was like, it doesn't look like this was intentionally excluded, so I've ported it. So it was originally tagged as a bug fix, but because we're adding a new feature and it's going to need new testing, I also added the tag new feature. But it has a pull request, and it's been reviewed by one person and seems to be working fine. So I was just thinking if we could get eyes on that, that might be something that would be easy to get into 1.8. If it looks like it needs considerable work, we should bump it. But because it is close, I figured we'd add to the list and see. So just so you guys know, I went through some of the issue queues this morning and started trying to like reorganize things that I don't think we're going to get done in time. But the things that look like we might get done in time, I just added to this list. So that's what these two are. And the second one, module filter update. This is just a usability improvement where if you're on the modules page and you filter for something and then you enable it, when the page reloads, the filter is lost. So then if you wanted to like configure that module, you've got to type it in again. And so somebody recommended just retaining the value of that field so that when the page reloads, it's already filtered to the module you just searched for, which seems like fairly sensible. And there's a pull request and it's a small change. So I figured get some eyes on that and see what people think.
Yeah, what this also does, actually, Jen, is it makes it so that when you filter the module list, you enable a module and then you save the entire modules form. So you actually enable a new module. It persists. Oh, did you just say that? I thought that you said when you submitted the search, not the.
Oh, no, I meant the like when you turn on the module, then you have to search for it again to enable, like configure the settings.
Yep. Got it.
That's what I meant. What I said.
Okay, yeah, that's a great little addition. Yeah, thanks also for starting to organize things into the 1.8 milestone. I think having items slated into the 1.8 milestone and bumping out the ones that aren't relevant, that provides an opportunity for anyone interested in getting features into 1.8 and are just looking around for interesting things to work on, could take a look at the 1.8 milestone and take on any of the items that are in that list.
In particular, anything that needs review should be higher priority. I think if we can get some people to just kind of test things, that would really help us out. We seem to have a lot of stuff that just kind of gets stuck at the needs review state.
Yep. Yeah. Speaking of which, I should also add that we had a bunch of issues that were marked RTBC like on the last bug fix release. So it definitely has been some really fantastic module or issue reviewing that's been going on. In particular, Opie has just been going to town on RTBCing issues, and that's really appreciated. So thank you very much. Okay, that's it for the 1.8 status update. We still have lots of work to do, and to clarify, once again, we have got code freeze coming up in 2 weeks. September 1st is the code freeze date. That's Friday. And yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. So in the schedule here, again, we've got the 2.0 section. No real changes on the 2.0 status. I think we'll probably continue.
I have a question. So okay. If September 1st rolls around and we don't know anything, do we bump 2.0 to May 15th, or do we bump it to January the following year?
Can you clarify what those two timelines really mean? Like, why would it be those two?
Well, if we're not going to do it on time, we need to figure out what the when we should next consider doing it. And I don't know if that means like, okay, well, right now we're doing 1.8. If January 1st becomes 1.9, does that mean that 2.0 happens at the next release, which would be the 15th? Or are we going to push it a whole year and then not do it until January in 2019?
You're saying, and so we would be stuck on 1.9 for a year?
I'm just wondering, like, what are, like, if we even have a plan for, like, do we push it out a year and say releases are every 4 years, or do we just say we'll release whenever we're ready?
Yeah, I'm still of the mind that we should release 2.0 when we actually have some substantive changes, because, like, you know, we have a lot of stuff about how our API doesn't break within a release, but we will make breaking changes when we go a major release. So I feel like explaining to people, okay, we're doing a major release, but there's no breaking changes, is going to be kind of weird, unless
unless our language becomes our major releases only have breaking changes and even versions or something. I mean, I don't know. Like, we have the ability to change. We have the ability to change that language. So if it becomes clear that the language we have now is wrong, we can change it. We just don't have any plan at all right now. Yeah. We just adopted Drupal's language. So
I mean, yeah. I mean, again, like, this is
out, like what does it mean to be 2.0?
Yeah, right. I think we should have a whole discussion about that at our summit.
I think that's a core developer conversation, not so much a summit thing.
Okay, or like, you know, I think maybe we should have a core developer meeting on that Sunday, after the summit, and have so yeah, because I still haven't seen any compelling new feature that would require breaking changes that were like, you know, Backdrop 2.0 now with blah, you know. It's like, I feel like we need something exciting to warrant a major version change.
Do we need something exciting to encourage people to upgrade, or do we need to break APIs?
I would say it's a little bit of both, that we should avoid breaking APIs as long as possible until they're holding us back from doing something exciting. Yeah. And once there's something exciting that warrants breaking the APIs, that's when we should go and do it.
And I don't think that, I mean, what if we never have something exciting that warrants breaking APIs?
It'll happen eventually.
Backdrop 1.16452.0. I mean, like, we have a good product, like, right now. Yeah. And I think that a lot of the exciting things that people want can probably be done in the 1.x cycle. Yeah. But I think that if we stay at Backdrop 1 forever, we aren't going to get as many adopters because everybody's like, oh, it's still on version 1.
Well, yeah.
This sounds a lot like, have you ever heard of there was an old database system before SQL became popular called DB2, and DB1 never existed. They actually started out and called it DB2 because nobody would ever trust a 1.0 product at that time. So they just called it DB2 just because that was better marketing.
Okay.
Or like CQ5 or something. I don't know. Not sure that's the same.
Let's put it this way. It's worth the discussion about whether, and maybe this would be like a one-time version bump just to get the marketing gains. We're going to bump major versions for marketing reasons, that we should have some sort of marketing push around it.
Yeah. That's
so
fair.
I feel like it's like, it's going to have to be like an actual, we're going to have to do a big push if we're going to bump versions because we need to actually get it out to people. But I think that we have we have more questions about like sort of where we're going with the project and who we want to be convincing. Like when we're like, let's convince people, like who are those people who are going to be convinced by a major version change? Who are we targeting? Yeah, so just basically, I think there's more questions about that, about, who are we trying to convince? But
okay. So maybe what we should do is say, we're not going to do 2.0 on January 1st. We'll know for sure on September 1st. And then say, have the conversation at Bad Camp, which is going to be before January 1st. And then we'll decide at Bad Camp or shortly thereafter whether we should reevaluate for the next release or push out a year and reevaluate. And hopefully if we know what Backdrop 2 means, that'll give us the insight to figure out how long it'll take us to get there.
Yeah.
I mean, but in any situation, oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, let's plan on doing 1.10 for January, because I feel like if we are going to do a 2.0 push, we might want to like make it an extra big push and maybe skip one release in order to prepare like a bigger 2.0 push or something.
Interesting. I was about to say the exact opposite, which was regardless of what we do, we should cycle, like no matter what. So like even if those minor releases have hardly anything new in them because of our shift, because of our focus on 2.0, like we should continue delivering on that every 4-month cycle, so we don't ever end up in a situation of like, people getting frustrated because their changes are never actually released.
Oh, that's fine, but I meant just sort of maybe we should spend an extra development cycle concentrating on 2.0.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so for now, let's just call it on the January 15th deadline. Is that what you're saying? Not wait till September 1st, because we need to have the conversation at Bad Camp. So
yeah, I was just going to say for January, we should just have a 1.10 release. 1.9. 1.9.
Yeah.
Is that just 1.9?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we should definitely have a 1.9 release. We wouldn't want to skip that.
Not an even number of months. Okay, no, that's fine. And then I'll update the website and everything so it doesn't say January 15th, so people aren't confused.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I could also be convinced that maybe every 10th release should be a major release.
Yeah.
And that we should just go through our backlog of breaking changes we want to make and just make them. But I just feel like adoption is like still so low, and there's still so few sites using Backdrop, and we're still hoping for so many Drupal sites that we don't want to break things unnecessarily. So yeah, I don't know.
Yep. Okay.
I think we all agree on that, but it's like a little too soon for us to remove things like the Drupal compatibility layer and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. That moves us into just general discussion, which is almost where we were already. But let's roll back around to relationship handling. So continuation on the discussion in 2134. So So this is to do with adding relationships to layouts. That right now, when you have a context like a piece of content or a node, or a user or taxonomy term, you have the ability to do stuff like put a condition on a block that says only show this block on a certain node type, or show the field, or pull out individual fields from a node and place them on the page. And that's available because of the context that are available on that layout. Relationships would make it so that you could add an author, add a relationship between the node and its author, which is a user entity, and then pull out fields on the user and display them maybe like the user's profile picture or bio information. You pull off their profile and show it in the sidebar of a piece of content that they wrote, something like that. So when I first wrote the layout system, or I should say when I ported panels and made it into layouts, all of the underpinnings of relationships are still in place in layout module. They're just not really exposed, like the functionality just isn't completed. And the pull request that Doc Wilmot put together in 2134 kind of carries that to completion. And what it would look like if completed would be when you're setting up a layout, the contexts get pulled in automatically as much as they can be. And you can add a manual context if you have another URL parameter that Backdrop doesn't know how to deal with. But then the pull request would make it so that you could, from the contexts that are there, add a relationship to another context when you're setting up the layout. And then when you go over to add blocks, you would have blocks and conditions from all of the relationships that you've added and all of the contexts that were there. So that would be a really awesome, powerful change. But and it would match to what we had previously seen in Drupal 7 using panels. But what I was thinking about doing instead, this is where we might go down a rabbit hole, is instead of specifying relationships at the layout level, we could add relationships at the block level. So every time you added a block, at the very top of the add block dialog, we would show a drop-down for contextual blocks or something like that. And in that drop-down, it would include node, so or content, if there were node-related blocks available. And if you were to select a context related to nodes, then the list of blocks would show you only the node-related blocks, like all of the fields that are related to that node. But at the same time, if there were any relationships supported by that context up at the top, a second drop-down would appear showing you a list of all relationships that you could chain off of the first context. And that would be like the author of the node, for example, and any reference fields that you might have. And then if you selected from that drop-down, then the list of blocks would change to show you only the user-related fields. And then a second or third drop-down would appear that, again, would let you chain further. So basically, you could, as you were adding blocks, you would be able to chain as far down as you wanted to from the add block interface. And every time you selected another level in the chain, the list of add blocks would change the context that is the bottommost relationship, basically.
I like that idea. Like, if I understand what you're saying, I like handling that at the block level, because if you have a bunch of blocks that are using those and you change the relationships of the whole layout, then all the blocks would break.
Yep.
So this is a good way to change what relationship you're using or something like that on for a block without having to go back to the layout, changing the whole, adding a relationship or changing a relationship, which could theoretically break other blocks. So,
yeah. And it also makes it so that the connection between relationships and what relationships actually do is right in the same place where you're actually adding blocks, as opposed to putting it on the settings page where you kind of have to think ahead and be like, what relationships am I going to need? Because you might not know that you need the user's bio field before you start placing blocks. And so it puts the functionality closer to the configuration, which would be a big win.
I worry that it's a bit confusing. It might be potentially confusing to people who don't understand what's happening. So I think that like looking at the user interface, and I don't know if we want to go so far as like maybe doing testing or asking people to take a look and see if it makes sense with fresh eyes.
Yeah. One thing that helps a tiny bit with that problem is that if your layout doesn't have any context in the first place, like the homepage layout, this problem, like the showing of the list of context and relationships, none of that is even a possibility because there's no context in the first place. So it kind of saves you from like it's a little bit more of a gradual introduction where the homepage and default layouts don't have these problems or these complexities. And then it's only once you start overwriting node level, like a custom, a layout at node /% that starts appearing.
Okay, that makes sense. So it was like if someone was creating a custom page with the layouts, then it wouldn't affect that.
Right, because there's no context in the first place.
Yeah. Which also shows that this is kind of like a marginal benefit to adding. It's only like a small number of layouts would have this. But yeah, it would save a lot of like creating views and stuff to do the relationships.
Yeah.
So it's definitely worth adding. Unless someone has other feedback on that. Does anyone have any feedback on where to put the thing? Or
I really like putting the thing at the block level. I wonder if like where the layout actually gets it, or the relationship gets attached, should be at the layout level or at the block level, just for like caching reasons. I know Nate talked a little bit about there being a static cache and us having access to whatever it is that was loaded, but it would just be good to confirm that like loading a relationship in like 10 blocks won't be any different than doing it in one. Or if we did it at the layout level, it would be always there for all blocks, whether they used it or not. But especially since all of our code adds the level at the layout level, if we would have to change all of that existing code to add it to the block level, or if we just need a user interface at the block level to attach it to the layout level. So just kind of trying to figure out like what the scope of the API change is here, and how we can build a clean user interface on top of the APIs we already have in the 1.x cycle, or if we need
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. So you're talking about the caching?
So two things, like the caching was my first concern. Like I don't want to be trying to load the user for every block that needs a user field on a node. My second concern is with the APIs we have now, because it was a part of panels, they all assume the layout is, the relationship is at the layout level. So a layout will have a context in any number of relationships, or any number of contexts that are defined by relationships. And so then if we're going to move that to the block level, is there going to be any API change needed in order to make that happen?
Well, here's okay, this is what I wanted to get into if we're done talking about where to put it in the user interface, is where are these relationships defined? Like in terms of the data architecture, how do we know that a node is linked to a user? And I would say that it should not be part of the layout system at all. It should instead be part of the entity API. And that entities, we have the entity info array that stores all of the data about an entity type, that we should add as part of that array, basically the relationships to other entity types.
Well,
Sorry.
What if the relationship isn't to an entity? Is that
what would it be to
now, yeah, the only thing we can deal with right now is, the only contexts that exist are all entities at this point.
But isn't that because those are all provided by core?
Yeah, but I don't know what you would connect to that's not an entity in terms of a context. I mean, if we can think of things that we.
Yeah, well, I would think like anything that has a database record could provide a context, and not all things that have a database record in Drupal are entities, right? So like you could have like a unique identifier and then load whatever the thing is, and then you want to have that thing available, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an entity.
Well, I would say maybe we could create a list of examples of what other things we'd list to. Like, I'm thinking mostly in terms of entities, and I think that we should see how these entities are linked in the entity API and how we could more explicitly define the relationships between core entities and how custom entities can define it, so that it's not only for this, but we have sort of. I feel like we have a. Sorry.
So there are a couple of non-entity things that I've done this far with panels. Node queues and flags are two of them. I don't know if flags and backdrop are entities or not. I think flags in Drupal 8 are now entities. But both of them are like, oh, if you want to put a block on the page that lists like all of the other nodes in the node queue that this node is on, like you want to have a node queue relationship, and a node queue is not an entity, but it has a unique identifier. And you can do that for node queues that are simple queues that have like a unique identifier, or node queues that are sub queues that use like a taxonomy term as an identifier. And there's a lot of way that you can build relationships between things. Like there's a lot of contrib modules that give you relationships between things that don't have anything to do with entities. So I think we should leave entities out of it in terms of our architecture. Like those are the examples that we are working with because that's what core is providing. But I don't think that should be related at all to how this.
Well, it's like we need to figure out how we need to figure out how you define these contexts then. Like, how would someone define a custom context for linking to the flags or something like that?
Right. Well, I think all of our contexts, there's already a way to you define, like we had taxonomy terms in core long before there was a context for taxonomy terms. Like there's already a way to do that.
Right now it's contexts are provided via hook layout context info.
Yeah.
I don't know. So like, I would
relationship stuff would probably be similar.
I would vote for context being driven, and maybe not only by the entity API, but also the field API. Or let's put it this way.
Well, we already have an API for this. I really understand why this is an issue. I mean, I think the question was, where are because we have a context. I don't know if we need a context as an object or if it's just an array of data at whatever point it gets past the layout. But we already have a thing called a context, and adding a relationship to a panel or a layout, sorry, just gives you another context. So like if you're on the node, and you already have a node context available, you add a relationship to the author, have two contexts available. One of them is the node and one of them is the author. And yes, those things can be entities. And if those entities have fields, then we get benefits like blocks that have fields. But any contrib module could add any additional context that is or is not an entity, and it can have any number of blocks that depend on that context being present that has anything to do with entity or not. Like entity is just one of any possible options that has stuff associated with it, which is a benefit, but it shouldn't have anything to do with a context. Like we already have an API for defining a context.
I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure when, like the flag module or something is just going to define blocks. Like it's just going to you're selecting the block type. One of those is going to be show the flags. I'm not sure why flags or something like that would need to find additional context, because it's already defining the blocks within the current context. Yeah,
so for a flag, you might want to, for example, show all of the other content that is also flagged with this flag, right? Like it's kind of anything that you have done in the past with views using relationships could be a valid use case for using relationships on a layout.
So just stepping back a little bit to give you guys a little bit more context into our current architecture. So there is a hook layout context info that deals with context. And for the entities that are in core that support it, node, user, and term, there is a single class called entity layout context that supports all entities globally. And so basically there is a hook for hook layout context info, but for the most part, all of them all use the same implementation, which is provided, which is for entities.
Yeah.
And it would probably end up looking the same way for relationships, that there'd be the relationships that would be provided in core would all be entities, and there would be a single class that dealt with the relationships of all entities. But layout module, that would only be the one implementation that layout module would use.
And that means that like contrib modules that add an entity would have a really easy way to hook into all of these systems because they're already entities, which is great.
Right. And you could, in theory, have something that's not an entity, but yeah, it's like there aren't any examples of that in core or even really any great ideas about what those things could be, but the possibility is there with contexts. And we probably do the same thing for relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, we'd almost have to do the same thing for relationships because they're really the same thing.
It's the context that's just related.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like in terms of like, because I've been obviously with the entity reference stuff, been delving into the entity API, and I feel like it'd be good to more explicitly define the relationships between different entities inside of the entity API, and move the relationships. Okay, and move the relationships between core entities into the entity API and into custom entities. So if you were just to define the relationship in the entity API between like your NID attribute or your UID attribute, say this is a reference to this other entity type, more explicitly in the entity API, then maybe you don't have to define a separate like layout relationship context or something like that when you're to set it up. It just automatically is handled, and handled by, yeah. I don't know. It's just like I feel like we have all these core relationships. They're already defined in like views, right? Like we're like when you have when you're linking a node to its user in views, where is that relationship data stored?
Yeah, explicitly in views. Still, it's in views data info or something like that. Views data info. So
if you're creating a new entity type that references another entity type, you'd need to set up, okay, I'm going to set up the relationship in views. And then you're like, okay, now I need to set up the same exact relationship in layout. Whereas like, if you're just to define the relationship once in the entity API, then you wouldn't have to do it specifically for views and layout separately.
Yeah, although it's
super messy because you don't want to have that relationship automatically added to all your views, or all your queries are going to get really slow. Like you want them.
No, it's just added. Well, it's just added as an option, because right now when you have to define like an explicit relationship option for views. Like it wouldn't automatically be added. It would just be added as an option to add to your current view.
Okay, that makes more sense. And so right now that's all in like the hook views data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a question, and this might be one of those Backdrop 2.0 things. Like maybe we have it defined both in layout and views, the relationships in those. Like maybe just put it in the layouts module for now, but like as part of 2.0, move like the relationships of things into lower down in the data architecture.
Well, I think like that's the kind of thing like in entities would be really easy to have it like the entity API provides all these things with like a flag. It's like you're creating an entity and you can be like, do you want to provide a views relationship? Yes, no. Do you want to provide a layout relationship? Yes, yeah, no. And depending on those values, those things will appear or not appear as needed. But I don't think that means we should like limit the API to only work with entities.
Oh yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I just hadn't considered other contexts, and I don't know, I'm still not convinced about the flag thing, about whether it actually needs additional context. But yeah,
I don't know if flag is a good example. I'm just thinking of like in panels, all of the things that I've specifically added so that they would be available, like written like custom plugins to do this. And there's a lot of things that are not entities.
Yeah. Well,
so,
okay. Well, let's put it this way. I'd be interested in hearing like a concrete example of a context that's not to an entity. Yeah, because I feel like
that's also like limited use case wise too. Like already relationships is kind of limited use case. And putting it in core, I think, is good for things like entities because those are majority use case. But
yeah.
you know, kicking that problem to contrib is also totally fine if we have the thing like we have now, where it's like we have this thing that works for all entities, and theoretically it could work for other things too. And letting them figure out how to do it is fine.
So yeah. Anyway, so the long and short of it is, I think that we have a sort of user interface, user experience issue of where to define these relationships within the thing. But then I also think that we have like sort of a back end how to store what the relationships are, data architecture issue.
Yeah,
so
and I just
think we need to keep both in mind.
Right now, that all happens at the layout level.
Yeah.
And we just don't have a UI for it.
Yeah.
But if our UI is going to be adding things to the block level, and we actually think architecturally we better to have those be stored at the block level, is that going to require an API change? And does that mean we shouldn't put in layout relationships until Backdrop 2?
So the API that we have right now is not usable. It's not functional. So even though there's places in the layout object that has like, you know, arrow relationships, like there's property for relationships, there's never anything in there, and it's not possible to use it. So we're not really breaking an API because there's nothing there to actually use. It's just stubbed out.
Okay, so it's not there. It's not like if you wrote a contrib module, you could access that thing and have leveraged it for something.
No.
In the next. Okay.
It does not work right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that gives us a little more freedom. In terms of 1.8, we have something that's kind of there, but hasn't had any attention since the last release. Would you be interested in bumping this to 1.9 and playing with the idea of moving the relationships to the block level instead of doing it at the layout level? And that would give us some time to like proof of concept that.
Mm-hmm. I'd be for bumping it and doing that. I feel like Nate's idea is better, and I feel like we need more time to make sure we implement it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds fair.
I know, Nate, you really want this feature, but you just had a really good idea about it, and it's 2 weeks before release. So.
Yeah, I know. This is why I should look at things earlier or sooner. Oh, well. Well, anyway, it's an idea. And one thing definitely needs to happen is we need to write that all down because right now it's not reflected in the issue. So we'll continue leaving it here, at least so that we can give it a status update next week and maybe officially bump it at that point. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys for the feedback. It sounds like that's in concept kind of a good idea. Yeah, we'll see where it leads.
Okay. Cool.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Okay. See you guys later.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, everybody, for joining.